We also created, when I first came in office, a blue-green algae task force. We had expert researchers and scientists involved, and basically we wanted to expedite progress towards reducing adverse impacts from blue-green algae, as well as other things that was plaguing the water. That task force released a set of recommendations in the fall, and those recommendations help support key funding and restoration initiatives and also guide regulatory changes needed to improve water quality for the benefit of all Floridians. So based on those recommendations, we were able then to package two very significant pieces of legislation and present that to the legislature and ask for their support. And I'm glad that we're able to be here today to sign these bills into law. But two of our top priorities for this most recent legislative session was one, a data-based comprehensive bill to protect and improve water quality that addressed all major sources of nutrient pollution. And then two was a bill to increase civil and administrative penalties for environmental crimes to create a meaningful deterrent for polluters, and that includes a lot of municipalities, not just private industry. So I'm proud to say that along with support from the legislature, we've achieved those goals. We got both bills across the finish line, and I think it's an exciting day to be able to sign these into law. Now, our water quality bill was really comprehensive, probably the most comprehensive bill we've seen in quite some time. It makes significant changes to expedite improvement of water quality throughout Florida by addressing issues related to wastewater, septic systems, stormwater, and agriculture. A huge component of this is dealing with these wastewater discharges. Many wastewater treatment systems in Florida are poorly maintained, and the network of pipes supporting them have fallen into disrepair. As a result of this, even relatively moderate rain events can cause a system to be flooded, forcing a discharge of raw sewage into waterways and estuaries. And since 2017, we've seen hundreds of millions of gallons of sewage discharges. So in fact, we recently had a major event down in Fort Lauderdale. So this legislation requires utilities to develop inspection, maintenance, and replacement plans for their wastewater systems rather than continuing to allow these systems to age and fall into even worse condition. Unfortunately, previously, the DEP at the state level, their authority to intervene was primarily after these discharges were occurring. Now, with the passage of this bill, the Department of Environmental Protection will have the authority to intervene on the front end by inspecting these systems and requiring better upkeep to avoid future discharges. Legislation's second major provision addresses septic tanks, which are also a large source of nutrient intrusion into our waterways. We have about 2.6 million septic systems in the state of Florida, which is a lot. The Florida Department of Health, which currently oversees the state's septic system regulations, only contemplates the human health impacts of septic systems, but not their environmental impact. This legislation transfers the authority of septic tank inspection from the Department of Health to the Department of Environmental Protection to make sure environmental harm by septic systems is finally accounted for. The legislation also requires our plans to improve impaired water bodies, known as Basin Management Action Plans, or BMAPs, to include septic remediation plans. We need to address the environmental impact of septic tanks, and this bill puts us on a path to do so. The legislation also addresses the state's regulation of storm water systems. When it rains, the stormwater system should be able to ensure the flow of water does not carry pollutants and nutrients into our waterways. Stormwater systems throughout the state are based on outdated science and are largely based on the singular purpose of preventing flooding, not adequately accounting for environmental impact. So this legislation directs the Department of Environmental Protection to adopt rules to ensure that our storm water systems throughout the state reflect the most up-to-date science and fully contemplate environmental harm. And finally, the Act acknowledges the role that agriculture plays in terms of agricultural runoff with our water quality, and it requires the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Affairs to perform on-site verification of best management practices every 2 years. And while this is a function with the best management practice that is regulated by the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, this bill will hopefully support those efforts. So all these changes are really strong step forward for Florida's environment. Certainly one of the most significant pieces of substantive legislation in quite some time, and I'm going to be happy to sign that into law just in a minute. We also have our environmental accountability bill. Along with our water quality bill, we needed a bill that had penalties for violating environmental laws that actually do what they're supposed to do, serve as a meaningful deterrent against bad actions. If you have penalties that are too low, that just becomes a cost of doing business. And so most of the penalties that we have in law have basically been there for 20 years, and they really didn't pack the punch that they needed to. So this bill not only increases civil and administrative penalties by 100% for sanitary sewer overflows, and 50% across the board for all other environmental crimes. It also authorizes the Department of Environmental Protection to assess daily penalties until a violation is addressed. This strengthened enforcement will hold polluters more accountable and further protect Florida's treasured natural resources. I want to thank the legislators who were involved. I think we have some here, Senator Gruters, Representative Payne. We also had Debbie Mayfield, Randy Fine, very important work to help get these bills across the line. So it's important to get the funding like we did last year and this year, but you also want to have good policy guiding that so that the dollars actually make a positive impact. And so today, we're going to bring up our DEP Secretary, Noah Valenstein, and then we're going to bring up Eric Eichenberg from Everglades Foundation, and then I'll sign the bills into law. So Noah?
Thank you, Governor. My name's Noah Valenstein. I have the privilege of being Secretary for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And when the governor got started, I think everyone was just trying to keep up with him. We were amazed during the first session to have already had a sweeping executive order, really putting water quality front and center as an issue for the state. For our agency, it was incredibly exciting and heartening to see that dedication. And we got to work, and you did simple things like telling a group of scientists to get together, study the problem, and give recommendations. Seemed simple, but simply hadn't happened. And so now, 2 years in, we have a full-fledged environmental movement going on here in Florida that I think the nation is paying attention to. You heard the governor talk about the first piece of legislation, which for me, having been in public service and working on the environment for almost 30 years, is certainly the most comprehensive legislation I've seen. And it started with that idea. Ask scientists what we should do, discuss it with the agency, and get all the stakeholders together. Work with agriculture, work with utilities, work with urban sources, work with homeowners with septic tanks. Don't point a finger, but ask people to come together and to do more now for Florida's environment. Again, a simple concept, but it simply had not been tried, and it certainly worked out well. I think the thing that is really getting us most notice throughout the nation right now is the governor didn't talk about one bill, right? The governor talked about a second bill also, and that's something you're used to now seeing is you hear something that the governor is doing for the environment that on its own is a monumental move forward to protect water quality, but yet there's more. And so for an agency to have across the board our penalties increased by 50%, which simply had not kept up with an increasing economy and cost of living, after years and years of being the same, is really going to help as a deterrent. Again, as the governor mentioned, for sanitary sewer overflows, which we've just seen too many here in Florida, they actually went up 100%. And so I'd thank the legislature for their support, thank the governor for really kicking off a massive environmental movement here in Florida. You cannot even stop at these two pieces of legislation when you're talking about the record funding for the environment, our first aquatic preserve in over 3 decades, land acquisition with one of the busiest cabinet meetings in years for land acquisition. And for that, I thank the governor.
Great.
Good afternoon, Eric Eichenberg with the Everglades Foundation. It's a privilege to be here this afternoon with the governor and the First Lady. 18 months ago, actually it was day 2, less than 48 hours after taking the oath of office, this governor laid out a bold vision for Florida's environment and for our natural resources. Now, a year and a half later, as we're here this afternoon in beautiful Juno Beach, this governor continues to cement his legacy as a true champion for what makes Florida great: our environment, our beaches, our Everglades, our natural springs, all of the facets that bring 125 million tourists to each and every year. The economy is intricately linked to our environment, and this governor, like no others, has made it not just the top priority of his administration, given not only for this generation, but for the next. And that's what this is all about. And this budget that the governor just signed, to have $300+ million go to Everglades construction projects, reservoirs, the bridging along Tamiami Trail, holding more water during the dry season so that when we have drought, when we have fires, we have the fresh water that's necessary to flow through the river of grass, under the bridges of Tamiami Trail, and ultimately that water gets down to the Florida Keys and to Florida Bay. That's the legacy of the DeSantis administration. We are proud to be here with him today. We're proud to see these actions being taken to move forward, to move water quality forward, to move penalties on those that pollute. That's what's critical. And again, it's under the leadership of this governor that we're seeing these great results. So on behalf of the Everglades Foundation, our partners like Captains for Clean Water and other conservation groups across Florida, Governor, thank you very much.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and make it official here. Oh, yeah, you get to watch. All right, hold on. You want some of the pen? Okay, here, let me write it, and then I'll give it to you. Here. Take it. Take it. You want to hand the pens out to the legislature? No. Hand the pens out, everybody.
Here's one to Miss Senator Carroll. Hand one out.
Tell you what, it's cooking here. These pens
It's cooking.
How are you?
All right, so this is the environmental fines. Got that done. Smile.
Say hi.
All right, you can pass those out to the legislators. Ask who wants one.
Okay, look over here.
All right, now here's water quality.
Thank you so much.
This is meant to be a really split on.
All right.
Thanks, sir.
Who else wants one?
I'm gonna get one considered Mayfield.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, one for
Anybody
Mayfield.
else?
Mayfield needs one.
For fine?
Thank you.
Good. All right, water quality, there you go.
There you go.
All right.
All right.
Give Dad a high five.
Sneak right here real quick. Good job, Madison. Thank you so much. All right, I'm gonna stick right here real quick.
Okay.
All right, well, so we're really excited. I mean, obviously we got to build on this next year, but had to make a lot of difficult choices. And between Florida Forever, between what we did with the Everglades, and then obviously the substantive legislation, I think it was a big win this year. And with that, happy to take some questions. Yes, sir. Yeah, I think sunscreen's important in Florida. Obviously, we want people to protect themselves, and that was the advice I got. I talked to different folks, doctors and scientists, and we want to be able to offer all the sunscreen. I think that's the better approach. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Yep. We're not even close to that. So we went through March, April. People were predicting we'd have 400,000 people hospitalized. never came. We had, very stable numbers all through May and early June were our best testing numbers, very low test results in terms of percent positive. Obviously you've seen a higher percentage test positive now, but just understand some of those states were testing at 60, 70%. So, we've been now 10 to 15. We obviously want to get that back down in the single digits. A lot of our tests are with people who are younger, who have either no symptoms or are very mild, and even the folks who are, going symptoms than what they saw in March or April. The reason why we did what we did was to have a flatter curve. When you have a flatter curve, you have the infections get spread out over a long period. In March, we have robust testing. Everyone that goes into a hospital now, if you go in for a procedure, you get tested. Someone's going to give birth, they get. That's a really, really significant thing. That infrastructure has been built in. Hospitals have a lot of capacity, which is very, very significant. We also have, with the long-term care facilities, now have COVID dedicated nursing facilities. So